In your top storied news at 9, police fired rubber bullets at picketing Riverlea residents south of Johannesburg. It's the latest community to take to the streets over social ills, including drugs. Well, several people were arrested and later released. Police have also been accused of heavy-handedness. Some Riverlea residents were injured after the police had fired rubber bullets at them. They had been picketing about communities plagued by drugs. Leaders of at least 10 coloured townships vowed to intensify their action. They're also planning a march to the Johannesburg Securities Exchange over economic exclusion. There were also claims of police corruption and collusion with drug lords. In what's being dubbed Blood Friday, residents will also be going to the Gauteng Premier's office by the end of the week. Well, for more on this, we are now joined on the line by Senior Reporter Chriselda Lewis for an update. Of course, Chriselda was on the ground today taking us through the details of the protest. A very good evening to you, Chriselda. What essentially were some of the highlights and the main plight specifically from the Riverlea community?
Well, Shanta, a very good evening to you. What certainly seems to stand out in all of this is that the coloured community certainly seem unrelenting about making authorities know that they're not going to tolerate the so-called non-assistance that they've been not getting from these authorities who they claim are supposed to be the ones to assist them in dealing with the issue of drug abuse in their communities. Well, the intensification of this strike action certainly seems that it's going to continue. With, of course, tomorrow, many of these coloured communities, over 10 of them, will be marching to the Johannesburg Securities Exchange, where you would recall amongst some of the key issues that they raised is them arguing that coloured people are basically not part of the economy of this country and they feel isolated. So we certainly seem to see a community that continues to want to raise some of these concerns with those in authority, including on Friday. You spoke about Blood Friday, where they will then march to the office of the Gauteng Premier, David Makura, where they say they want him to come up with a plan on what he plans to do to assist coloured communities in getting rid of some of the drug lords and drug dens in these areas. Yeah. But it's quite known, you know, Shante, who these drug lords are within these communities, but certainly what seems to ring prominent amongst many of the residents in these various areas is that they simply cannot do anything about it on the basis that they're extremely scared for their lives and for the lives of their children. So it's going to take a whole lot of collective effort, I guess, in order to deal with the situation that these communities are facing.
Yeah, Chriselda, just take us through the frustration that these coloured communities are facing in the different parts of Johannesburg. They all seem to be having the same problems. And, you know, crossing over to you just earlier on in the day, and having heard some of the community members and what they were complaining about, saying they're tired of broken promises, they're tired of marching, they're tired of nothing being done. Specifically, if you look at the relationship that they describe between people that they supposedly are supposed to trust, the South African Policing Service, and of course the drug lords in the area.
Well, there's certainly been a trust deficit between the coloured communities and government, because what they've pointed out over the past couple of weeks at this stage is that they've raised a number of their concerns with those in authority. And I'm talking about some officials who've now moved to other portfolios within government as well, following, of course, the presidency of the now former president, Jacob Zuma. And a lot of promises were made during that time in many of these communities, extending to the current administration of President Cyril Ramaphosa. And they don't really know at this stage where to put their trust, because they say they've spoken about a number of these issues for the longest time. What they say is that you find quite a number of these social ills that are really interlinked, because they argue that the reason why their children have resorted to drugs, why they've resorted to colluding with some of these drug lords, why they've resorted to selling drugs on the street, is because there's absolutely nothing to do in their communities, and their children basically don't have some of the employment opportunities. They are not seeing any development in their areas. And they're saying their children simply have no choice but to resort to this kind of behavior, or are lured by drug lords to be involved in the sale of drugs in these communities. So they place the problem straight on the doorstep of government, whom they say has the responsibility to ensure that they assist them in this, because they cannot do it on their own because they fear for their lives. So I think over the next couple of days, we're really going to see much more intensification of this kind of action. I think in particular, if you've got every one of these communities now holding meetings, the leadership of these different communities holding meetings and deciding where next they plan to march to get their voices heard.
Yeah, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Definitely gaining momentum in those protests. For SABC News, Senior Reporter Chriselda Lewis just taking us through what's been taking place in Riverlea this afternoon and this evening, and what we can expect what has now been dubbed Blood Friday, as collective communities in the Gauteng province are said to make their way to the Gauteng Premier's office, Mr. David Makhura, to voice some of their concerns. Some other news this evening: President Cyril Ramaphosa has thanked Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu for what he termed his lifelong dedication to